Okay, the focus of the lesson today is going to be on a man named Sigmund Freud, and his last name is pronounced Freud. And Freud is not a philosopher. Would be today what we would call a psychologist, but he is particularly important in history of ideas in the West, and that's who we focus on in this class. Freud is from Vienna, Austria. He lived and worked there, and this is a city that he is closely associated with. Freud was Jewish, and so he fled the Nazis in 1938 to London, and he died in London. Freud had a medical degree from the University of Vienna, and he was a neurologist, someone who treats nervous disorders, and in particular, he treated nervous disorders in women. And that particular sort of ailment, nervous disorders in women, back then was called hysteria. We don't call it that today. He was fascinated by talking with these patients, with these women. Often he could not find an organic cause for physical symptoms. It could be paralysis, it could be deafness. And he finally came to believe that these symptoms were physical manifestations. That these symptoms were physical manifestations of something occurring at the level of psychic energy, in the psyche. And he developed an idea that emotional traumas, and I'm here, he developed the idea that emotional traumas can generate physical symptoms by way of unconscious processes. And that is an imaginative insight. He soon put the practice of neurology aside and began investigations into what would later be called psychology. Freud wanted to discover more about the depths of the human psyche. His work in the field of psychology led him to construct a famous model of the psyche. And we're going to look at something that Freud, that is very closely associated with Freud and he is well known for, and that is his three-part model of the human psyche. All right. At the core of our nature is a non-rational force. It is composed of primitive drives and urges. And Freud called this part of the psyche the it. But the English translation of Freud's work, and Freud of course would have written in German, being in Austria, the English translation of Freud's work used the Latin word for it, which is id, and that's a famous term, and that's what it would be known by today, the id, the part of the psyche that is composed of primitive drives, urges, and instincts. Freud believed there was an evolutionary purpose at work in the development of the id. Freud too admired the work of Darwin when we think of evolutionary process. The desire for pleasure is important to us, especially sexual pleasure, for that is important for the survival of the species. And to Freud, sexual urges are the most powerful urges. But also powerful are aggressive, violent instincts. These are important for survival as well. The forces of the id are continually at work. They are pushing us. They are surging. But they're not open to rational awareness. They are part of what Freud calls, and this is another famous word for him. I don't have it up here. I have it over here. They are part, the forces of the id are part of what Freud called the unconscious. So we're not aware of these.